Revenge with Lisa. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into the data center and the backup generator was running on a Tuesday morning. Not because of a drill, not because of a storm, just running. Because someone had rebooted the primary cooling system without logging a ticket, and now 3 racks were sitting at 94 degrees Fahrenheit, while the system quietly decided whether to melt itself into slag. That data center was mine. Not on the org chart, not on the lease, but mine, the way a surgeon owns an OR. Because I was the one who knew which switch did what, which cable was mislabeled, and which vendor would actually pick up the phone at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. I'd been the senior network infrastructure manager at this regional healthcare network for 11 years. 11 years of keeping patient records moving, insurance claims processing, and imaging systems online so that doctors in 4 hospitals could see what was happening inside someone's body in real time. If I called in sick, somebody somewhere waited longer for a diagnosis. That's not ego. That's just math. I'm not what people picture when they picture someone who does this job. I'm a woman in my early 40s. I wear cardigans. I keep a small cactus on my desk named Gerald after a particularly stubborn routing error I fixed in 2019. I drink my coffee black, and I have a playlist called Systems Thinking that is just Tom Waits and Fleetwood Mac. I don't go to conferences. I don't have a LinkedIn premium account. I just show up, and I make things work, and for 11 years that was enough. Then the new ownership group arrived. The company got acquired, strategically realigned, by a private equity firm out of Chicago. They sent a transition team. The transition team included a VP of digital transformation named Owen. Owen had a watch that cost more than my car, and a habit of saying, at the end of the day, before every sentence, as if he was constantly approaching a sunset that never quite arrived. He was 31. His entire career had been in consulting. He had never, in his professional life, been responsible for anything that broke. Owen brought with him a nephew. I'll call him the nephew because that's what he was. Owen's sister's kid, fresh out of a 12-week cybersecurity bootcamp, handed the title of IT modernization specialist the way you'd hand a toddler a wrench and call him a plumber. His name was Bryce. He wore Allbirds and called everything legacy the way people who've just learned a word use it constantly for a month. I was called into a glass conference room on a Wednesday afternoon in March. Owen was there. Bryce was there, already on his laptop, barely looking up. And the new regional director of operations, a woman I'd met twice, was sitting at the head of the table with the expression of someone reading a termination notice they didn't write but agreed to sign. "We really value what you've built here," Owen started. I hate that sentence. That sentence is the institutional equivalent of, "I'm not racist, but." Nothing good has ever followed those words in a professional setting. But we're moving toward a cloud-first infrastructure model, he continued. Bryce has been doing a deep dive on your systems, and the assessment is that a lot of what you're managing can be automated or migrated. We're looking at right-sizing the team. Right-sizing. They were firing me with a yoga term. The migration plan is already drafted, Bryce said, without looking up. We're moving everything to a managed cloud service. The on-prem stuff is basically holding us back. It's all very 2013. It's 2025, I said, and it works. Those imaging systems processed 47,000 patient scans last year without a single outage. That's because of your manual oversight, Bryce said, as if that was an argument against me. The whole point is to remove the human dependency. I looked at Owen. You're talking about HIPAA-regulated clinical data, patient imaging, EHR systems that are integrated with 4 hospital campuses and 24 specialist networks. Bryce has mapped the dependencies, Owen said. I looked at Bryce. He was 23 years old and he had mapped my 11 years of institutional knowledge in what I later found out was a 2-week period during which he had not once asked me a single question. The regional director cleared her throat. We'd love for you to support the transition. We have a 2-week knowledge transfer period. Today's my last day, Owen said, which was new information even to the regional director based on the way her head turned. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I felt something settle in my chest, cold and quiet, the way water goes still right before it freezes. I thought about the 11 years of undocumented workarounds, the vendor relationships I'd built by being a real human being to people at 3 a.m., the encryption protocols I'd designed, the disaster recovery plan that existed only in my head and in a binder on my shelf at home because I'd learned a long time ago that documentation only gets used to replace you. Okay, I said, just okay. Not, I'll cooperate, not, let me help make this smooth. Just okay, the way you say it when someone tells you the weather and you have no interest in discussing it further. Owen looked vaguely unsettled. He'd been expecting something. Tears, maybe, or anger. He got stillness, and stillness from someone who knows where all the bodies are buried is a much more frightening thing. I asked for a box. I packed my cactus, my travel mug, my worn copy of TCP/IP Illustrated that I'd had since grad school, and a small framed photo of my dog, a very old basset hound named Rutherford. I powered down my workstation. I handed over my badge. I shook the regional director's hand. I did not shake Owen's hand or Bryce's hand. I walked out through the lobby, past the receptionist who looked at me like she wanted to say something and then didn't, and out into a grey March afternoon that smelled like rain and bad decisions. I sat in my car. I did not drive. I just sat there for a moment and thought about the fact that the disaster recovery failover hadn't been tested in 8 months, and that the encryption certificate on the claims processing system renewed automatically, but only if a script I'd written ran on the 15th of every month, and that script ran on a server that required my credentials to authenticate the cron job. My credentials that as of approximately 4:15 p.m. on a Wednesday were being revoked. I drove to the grocery store. I bought a rotisserie chicken, a bottle of good Burgundy, and a package of those fancy crackers that come in a tin. I went home, I fed Rutherford, I poured myself a glass of wine. I sat on my back porch and listened to the neighbors' wind chimes and thought about absolutely nothing for approximately 45 minutes. It was the most peaceful I'd felt in years. Then I opened my laptop. Not the work laptop, that was gone. My personal laptop, 11 years old, runs Linux, covered in stickers from conferences I'd attended, and one that just says, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" in very small type. I couldn't access the internal systems, obviously. But I had built those systems, and I knew their external-facing behavior the way you know the sound of your own house settling at night. I could watch the traffic patterns on the endpoints I'd designed. I could see what was pinging and what wasn't. What I saw by Thursday morning was almost nothing. The claims processing pipeline had gone completely quiet. Not scheduled maintenance quiet. Dead quiet. The imaging distribution relay, the thing that pushed scan results from the imaging centers to the ordering physicians, was throwing intermittent timeouts that would be invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for them. And the authentication handshake on the EHR system was cycling in a loop, which meant something had changed in the directory structure and the system was having an identity crisis every 45 seconds. I made a note in a document on my personal laptop. Timestamp, observation, probable cause, likely consequence. I did this the way you document a patient's vitals. Not because anyone asked me to, just because it felt necessary to have a record. By Thursday afternoon, my phone was starting to vibrate. Texts from former colleagues in that cautious, plausibly deniable way people reach out when they know something is bad, but aren't sure how bad. "Hey, have you talked to anyone recently?" Not to alarm you, but Bryce has been in Owen's office for 3 hours. The imaging system is showing delays, like an hour delays. Radiology is upset. I did not respond. I took Rutherford for a long walk. We went past the park. He smelled approximately every object in a 2-block radius. It was a good walk. Thursday night, I ran a bath. I put on Norah Jones. I had a second glass of wine. My phone was on the edge of the sink, face up, and I watched the notifications accumulate like snowfall. At 9 p.m., the regional director sent me a text. "Lisa, I hope you're settling in okay. If you have time in the next few days for a quick call, I'd love to connect. That's corporate for, please help us, we've made a terrible mistake, but I'm not allowed to say that explicitly yet. At 11 p.m., I got an email from Owen to my personal address, which he must have found in an old system record. Subject line, transition questions, quick ask. The body was 2 paragraphs of corporate padding followed by, Bryce is having trouble locating the authentication tokens for the imaging relay. If you have a moment, could you point him in the right direction? Point him in the right direction. As if 11 years of infrastructure could be GPS navigated by a guy who'd been coding for 3 months. The authentication tokens weren't tokens exactly. They were part of a certificate chain I'd built that integrated the imaging relay with the hospital network's security fabric. You couldn't just find them. You had to understand the architecture they lived in. Which Bryce didn't. Which Owen didn't. Which, it was becoming clear, nobody at that company currently employed understood. I closed my laptop. I went to sleep. I slept beautifully. Friday morning arrived like a judgment. I woke up at 7, which is my natural wake-up time because I'm a person who has scheduled herself for 11 years, and my body has simply internalized it. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window watching Rutherford investigate the backyard with the slow deliberateness of a very old dog who has nothing but time. I thought about how nice it was to not be responsible for whether anyone's MRI results reached their doctor. Then I checked the news. The regional ABC affiliate had a crawler at the bottom of the screen during the morning segment. Regional Health Network report system disruption. Patients advised to call ahead for appointment confirmations. System disruption. That's what they call it when someone with a Bootcamp certificate tries to migrate a HIPAA-compliant clinical infrastructure in 72 hours and the whole thing falls over. My phone was ringing before I finished my first cup of coffee. I did not answer. I watched the calls come in. Owen, the regional director. A number I didn't recognize that I suspected was corporate. Owen again. The regional director again. Owen a third time, which suggested he'd moved past strategy and into panic. At 10 a.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. There's a man in a suit on my porch holding a manila envelope with the universal posture of someone delivering documents they did not write and do not want to defend. I opened the door. Lisa, he said. That's me. He handed me the envelope. I signed. I closed the door. I opened it at my kitchen table with my coffee. It was an emergency consulting agreement. Rate, $400 an hour. Scope, transition support, system access restoration, knowledge transfer facilitation. Duration, not to exceed 40 hours. 40 hours at $400. That was $16,000 for what I'd spent 11 years building and what would take me approximately a weekend to restore if I chose to. I set the agreement on my kitchen table next to my coffee mug and my cactus, which I had brought home in my box and placed on the windowsill where it seemed to be thriving. I got a Sharpie from the junk drawer. I wrote no in large letters across the signature line. I photographed it. I sent it to Owen with a single line of text. That's not a number. He called within 4 minutes. I watched the phone ring and then let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the voicemail notification appeared. I let it sit there for 10 minutes. Then I listened. Lisa, okay, I hear you. The number needs to be higher. We can talk about the number. Please call me back. The imaging backlog is at 6 hours and the radiology department is... And then his voice cracked slightly. Just slightly, and he said, quieter. We have patients waiting for cancer screening results. Please. That landed. I won't pretend it didn't. I sat with it for a minute. The Brads and the Owens of the world, they never think about the patients. They think about the system, the efficiency, the cost center. They don't picture the woman in a hospital gown sitting in a waiting room while her scan results loop in a digital queue that nobody can unlock. I called the regional director, not Owen. She picked up on the first ring. Thank God, she said, then caught herself. Lisa, hi. Thank you for calling. What's the actual scope of the outage? I asked. She told me. The imaging relay had been down since Thursday at 6 p.m. The claims processing pipeline had stalled, which meant the billing system was also frozen, which meant every insurance submission since Wednesday was sitting in a queue. The EHR authentication loop was causing intermittent access failures for physicians trying to access patient records, which was creating a safety issue. And Bryce had apparently attempted to fix the imaging relay by following a tutorial and had, in the process, overwritten a routing table that I had spent 4 days building in 2021. Is Bryce still employed? I asked. A pause. That's being evaluated. That's not a yes. He's been asked to step back from any further system access, she said carefully. I want to speak to whoever owns the decision on what I'm paid. I said, not Owen. Another pause. Then, 1 moment. There was a hold, 2 minutes of silence, and then a new voice came on. Alter, tired, the voice of someone who had been in meetings since 6 a.m. and had not had enough coffee. He introduced himself as the CFO. I'd never spoken to him. He probably never heard my name until today. Ms. And he used my last name, which I won't repeat here. I understand you have conditions. I do, I said. I was standing at my kitchen counter. Rutherford was asleep at my feet. The cactus was on the windowsill. I was wearing my old university sweatshirt and I had not brushed my hair. I had never felt more powerful in my professional life. $25,000, I said. Wire transfer before I touch a keyboard, not hourly, flat rate for the weekend. He exhaled. That's what you're losing in billing holds alone exceeds that number every 4 hours, I said. I've already done the math. You should too. Silence. Additionally, I said, I want a new employment contract. Senior Director of Infrastructure, not Manager. Reporting to the CIO, not Operations. With Owen having zero authority over my department. Owen is. I don't care what Owen is. Those are the terms. You can have them, or you can keep troubleshooting with Bryce. More silence. Then, is there a third condition? Yes, I said. A formal written acknowledgement to the full staff and to the affected hospital networks that the outage was caused by a premature and inadequately planned system migration, not a failure of the existing infrastructure. I want the record corrected. The system didn't fail. The decision did. The CFO was quiet for long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then he said, Done. All of it. Wire the money first, I said. When it clears, I'll get in my car. I hung up. I stood at the counter for a moment. Rutherford opened one eye, determined this did not require investigation, and went back to sleep. I texted my attorney, a woman I'd hired 3 years ago after a situation with a contractor dispute and had retained since because she is magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, to let her know the situation and that I'd be signing a new contract Monday. She texted back 3 words, don't sign anything. And then an hour later she texted, unless the numbers are right. Are the numbers right? I texted back the numbers. She replied, sign everything. At 2:47 p.m., my banking app sent me a notification, incoming wire, $25,000, arriving same day. I put my phone down and looked at it for a second. Then I went to the bathroom, washed my face, put on a clean flannel shirt and my good jeans, and went to find my laptop bag. I drove to the hospital network's main campus. It was a grey afternoon, that particular flat Midwestern light that makes everything look like a photograph that didn't quite develop. The parking lot was half empty. I pulled into a visitor spot which felt appropriate. Walking into that building without a badge, as a guest, as a contractor, that was a strange feeling. The security guard at the desk knew me. His name was Walt, and we had eaten vending machine sandwiches together on approximately 40 night shift emergencies over the years. He looked at me with an expression that was half relief and half apology. They said you'd be coming, he said. They were right for once, I said. Is the coffee fresh? Made it when they told me you'd called back. I took the elevator up. The IT floor was the kind of quiet that happens when people are trying very hard to look busy while also being terrified. Owen was in a conference room with the door closed. Through the glass, I could see him on the phone, one hand over his eyes. Bryce was not visible, which suggested he'd either been sent home or had located a sufficiently large hole to disappear into. I didn't stop at the conference room. I went directly to the server room, used the temporary access card they'd left at the front desk for me, and stepped inside. The smell of a server room is specific and unmistakable. Warm metal, ozone, the particular hum of cooling fans doing the most important and least appreciated work in modern civilization. These machines were not mine anymore, technically, but they remembered me. The temperature, the airflow, the rhythm of the diagnostics. It all felt familiar, like coming home to a house you haven't lived in for a week and finding everything exactly where you left it. I pulled up the logs. What Bryce had done was not malicious. That's the thing about people who don't know what they're doing. The damage they cause isn't evil. It's just catastrophic in the ordinary way. He'd followed a migration guide he'd found online, designed for a generic enterprise setup, and applied it to a highly customized clinical infrastructure without understanding that every standard step he followed was interacting with a dozen non-standard configurations I'd built specifically for this environment. He'd overwritten the routing table. He'd interrupted 3 authentication handshakes mid-cycle, leaving them in a broken state that the system was now endlessly trying to resolve. He'd moved the imaging relay configuration file to a path that didn't exist in the new directory structure, so the relay was booting, looking for its instructions, finding nothing, and rebooting again on a 90-second loop, like a confused dog trying to find a toy that's been put away. I started typing. It was rhythmic and calm, the way it always is when the problem is clear and you know the solution. Diagnose, restore, verify. The mechanical keyboard I brought from home had a particular sound, a clean tactile click, and in the quiet of the server room it was the only sound that mattered. The door opened about an hour in. I didn't turn around. "Is it?" Owen's voice, careful, like someone approaching a dog they've already startled once. "Don't," I said, not angrily, just firmly. I just wanted to see Owen. I turned around. He was standing in the doorway in his expensive shirt, his watch catching the light, looking like a man who has spent his entire career moving fast enough that consequences never quite caught him, and who was now very much caught. "I'm going to need you to stay out of this room until I'm finished. You can wait in the conference room. I'll let you know when it's done." He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded. He left. The door closed. I turned back to the screen and kept working. By 1:30 in the morning, the imaging relay was back online. By 1:45, the EHR authentication was cycling cleanly. By 2:10, the claims processing pipeline had resumed and the billing queue was moving. I ran a full diagnostic sweep. Everything green. The backlog of imaging results would process through the night. The physicians would have access to their patients' records by morning rounds. The insurance submissions would clear within 48 hours. The compliance, exposure, and there had been some, in those 72 hours of degraded access to clinical records, would need to be assessed and reported, and that was going to be a deeply unpleasant conversation for the organization to have. But that was not my problem tonight. I packed up my laptop. I walked out of the server room. The floor was deserted except for 2 people in the conference room, the regional director who had her shoes off and was drinking what appeared to be cold coffee, and the CFO who was asleep in a chair with his mouth slightly open. "It's done," I said. The regional director looked up. She had the face of someone who has not slept and is not sure yet whether she is relieved or still terrified. "All of it? Imaging is back. EHR is clean. Claims are moving. There's a backlog, but it'll clear by morning." I paused. "You're going to need to file a breach notification assessment. The access interruptions to patient records over the past 72 hours create a HIPAA reporting obligation. Your compliance team will know what to do." She wrote that down. Her hand was shaking slightly. "The new contract on Monday," I said. "My attorney will be reviewing it before I sign. And the written statement about the outage, I want to see the draft before it's sent." She nodded. "Of course. Good night," I said. I walked to the elevator. Walt was still at the security desk. He was reading a paperback. "Fixed?" he asked. Fixed, I said. Coffee for the road? He held up a paper cup. I took it. Thanks, Walt. The parking lot was empty and cold. The lights made orange pools on the asphalt. I got in my car, put the coffee in the cup holder, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. I was tired in a way that was clean and complete, the kind of tired that comes from having done the actual work. I drove home. The streets were empty. Rutherford met me at the door with the dignified enthusiasm of a very old basset hound, which is to say, he wagged his tail twice and then led me to the kitchen to check whether his food bowl had been replenished in my absence. It had not. I fed him. I sat on the kitchen floor next to his bowl while he ate, which is something I do sometimes, just sit on the floor at 2 a.m. and watch my dog eat his food like it's the most important thing happening in the world, because sometimes it is. Monday morning I wore my good blazer, not the one I save for funerals, the other one. I signed the contract. Senior Director of Infrastructure, salary that I will not specify here except to say it was the number I asked for, and it made my attorney smile, which is not a thing she does casually. Owen, I was told, was being transitioned to a strategic advisory role, which is corporate, for we moved him sideways so fast he didn't have time to pack his desk. Bryce was no longer with the organization. He had, according to the regional director, decided to pursue a different career path. I did not ask what path. I didn't need to know. The written statement went out to staff and to the affiliated hospital networks on Monday afternoon. I had reviewed the draft. It said what I'd asked it to say. The outage had resulted from a premature infrastructure migration that had not accounted for the complexity and clinical interdependencies of the existing systems. The existing infrastructure had not failed. The project planning had failed. The organization was committed to a more rigorous approach to system changes going forward, including proper consultation with subject matter experts. Subject matter experts. That was me. I was the subject matter expert. It had taken a 72-hour outage, 6 hours of overnight work, and 11 years of institutional knowledge to establish that fact in writing, but there it was. I walked into my new office, a corner office, actual windows, a door that closed, and set Gerald the cactus on the windowsill. He caught the morning light. He looked good. I sat down at my desk. I opened a terminal window. I typed a diagnostic command and watched the green text scroll. Systems nominal. All services operational. The network was healthy and quiet, doing what it was supposed to do, the way it had done for 11 years, because someone had built it carefully and maintained it obsessively and understood that the invisible work is the work that keeps people safe. My phone rang. It was a number from the billing department. Infrastructure, I said. This is Lisa. Hi. It was a young woman, slightly nervous. The insurance portal is showing a weird error message when we try to submit a secondary claim, and IT said to call you. What's the error code? I asked. She read it to me. I already knew what it was. It was a known quirk with the claim system that I had worked around for 3 years and that existed precisely because the vendor had never bothered to fix it. Okay, I said. Here's what you do. I walked her through it. It took 4 minutes. She thanked me. I told her she was welcome. I hung up. I poured my coffee. I looked out the window. The parking lot was filling up with morning arrivals. Somewhere in that building, imaging results were queuing and clearing. Patient records were being accessed by physicians who needed them. Insurance claims were transmitting cleanly to clearing houses in real time. Nobody would notice. That's the whole point. They'll notice when it breaks. They'll call in a consultant in a blazer with a watch that costs more than a used car, and he'll look at the system and call it legacy. He'll bring in his nephew, he'll right-size the team. And then the system will break. And then they'll call me. Or maybe this time, someone will have learned something. I wasn't holding my breath. But I had a corner office, a cactus on the windowsill, a contract that said what I was worth, and a very old basset hound waiting at home who had opinions about dinner time and no patience for corporate restructuring. That was enough. That was more than enough. I've thought about that Wednesday afternoon a lot since then. Not obsessively, not with bitterness, Just the way you turn over a smooth stone sometimes and look at what's underneath it. Owen walked into that building with complete confidence that he understood what he was looking at. And that confidence wasn't fake. He genuinely believed it. That's the part people miss when they tell stories like mine. The Owens of the world aren't villains in the way we like to imagine villains. They're not twirling mustaches. They're people who have been rewarded consistently and generously for the appearance of understanding, for decks and frameworks and the right vocabulary, and who have never once been in a room when the thing they were describing actually broke. Owen had never sat in a server room at 2 a.m. with a cooling failure and a 6 a.m. deadline. He didn't know that was possible. And because he didn't know it was possible, he didn't factor it into anything he planned. That's not evil. That's just a very expensive gap between confidence and competence. The problem is when that gap gets filled with someone else's 11 years. What happened to Bryce, and I do think about Bryce sometimes, is that he was handed a situation that was several levels above his actual skill and told by someone he trusted that he could handle it. That's not entirely his fault. He was 23 and eager, and nobody told him the truth about what he was touching. The kindest thing I can say is that I hope he learned something from it. The honest thing I can say is that I don't know if he did. Some people come out of an experience like that humbled and curious. Some come out of it looking for someone to blame. I don't know which one Bryce became, and I don't need to. What I do know is what I learned about myself in those 4 days. I learned that I'd spent 11 years being quietly indispensable and making that indispensability look easy, and that making hard things look easy is a trap. Not because you should perform struggle for an audience, but because when something looks easy, people start to believe it is easy, and then they start to believe that anyone could do it, and then they hire someone who can't. I had hidden the complexity of my work so well that I had accidentally convinced the people above me that the complexity didn't exist. That's on me, at least partly. I also learned something about what I'm willing to accept. For 11 years, I had accepted being furniture, being the slightly dusty lamp that keeps the room lit and gets thanked never. I told myself I didn't need recognition. I told myself the work was enough, and maybe for a while it was. But there's a version of self-sufficiency that's actually just self-erasure, and I'd been living in that version for a long time without naming it. The moment Owen said right-sizing, and I said okay, that stillness I felt wasn't just calm. It was something clarifying, like a fever breaking. I realized I had been so focused on keeping the system running that I had forgotten to keep track of what I was worth. The system knew. The CFO found out pretty fast, but I had to learn it again myself, in a parking lot on a Wednesday afternoon with a cactus on the passenger seat and 11 years of institutional knowledge that nobody had thought to put a number on until they needed it back. The wire transfer hit my account at 2:47 p.m. on a Friday. $25,000. And I want to be honest about something. The money wasn't the point. Even though the money was real and necessary and correct, the point was the acknowledgement. The written statement that said the infrastructure hadn't failed, the decision had. That sentence mattered more to me than the number. I had spent 11 years being the reason nothing broke, and I needed it on record even once that was true. I'm back in that building now with a better title, a better contract, and a corner office where Gerald the cactus gets morning light. Some days I still sit on the floor with Rutherford while he eats his dinner, just to stay calibrated about what actually matters. The work matters. The people the work protects matter. Everything else is a deck somebody made to justify a decision that had already been made. Don't let them make you easy to dismiss. Do the hard work and let people see that it's hard.